subscribers. I have a short little video here today that I wanted to make for some time because I think it's a very important topic. There's been a lot of misconception thrown around out there for about 2,000 years, but also some things really did happen and people took things the wrong way. So, for the last 2,000 years, cliche saying is that Christianity justified slavery. You know, this is to do with like the African slave trade and the oppression of other cultures and colonization and all of that. So what I mean is that the cliche thing that people say is that those Europeans or whatever it might be, that they justified everything that they did with Christian Bible verses. So everybody has this idea in their mind that the New Testament or that um, Christianity justifies slavery. So everybody is basically spoon-fed ideas that there are verses where it tells servants to obey their masters. Now, at face value, there are verses that say that. I just double-checked everything and when I got my verses ready for the stream. There's about three, I don't think there was four, but three instances where I think Paul did all three, where he said, servants, obey your masters. But I'll get into that after reading a whole pile of other verses that Paul wrote. But at the end of the day, it's quite offensive to say that Christianity justifies slavery, or that it did justify slavery, because the religion of Christianity would never justify and did not justify slavery. Okay, all the verses that I have here quite simply show there's no room for slavery under Christianity. Now, whether people in history, under the guise or the name of Christianity, went out and did, terrible things with slavery, that's got nothing to do with Christianity. Just because those people who did commit slavery considered themselves Christian or had the title of Christian does not mean that it has any bearing on what real Christianity stands for and teaches. So I wanted to clear the air of all the misconception that's been thrown around out there, right? So we all know that, well, actually, I won't even go there. The most important verse to read is from 1 Timothy, but before I do that, everybody knows the typical saying, right? The Christian motto, which is one of the verses. I don't have it here today, but everybody knows it. There's no point bringing it up. But everybody knows the verse that do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That was like the core teaching of Jesus. And where in that teaching is there any room to enslave another person? How could anybody who's a real Christian, who's supposed to live by that prerogative of do unto others as you'd have them do unto yourself, how could you possibly enslave somebody else? It's ludicrous. Okay? But I have all the other verses here which will show that there is no room for slavery under the teachings of Christianity. Okay? Not just that. So first we're going to go to 1 Timothy chapter 1. We'll go down to verse 9 or verse 8. It says, and we have known that the law is good, if anyone may use it lawfully. That's actually an example of Paul praising the law of God, because a lot of people claim he taught that the law is gone, but there's one of the 35 examples where he actually testifies to it. So Paul says, and we have known that the law is good, if anyone may use it lawfully. Having known this, that for a righteous man law is not set, but for lawless and insubordinate persons, ungodly and sinners, impious and profane, parricides and matricides, men slayers, whoremongers, sodomites, men stealers, liars, perjured persons, and if there be any other thing that to sound doctrine is adverse. And it goes on. So basically the point of this is it's listing off very evil, criminal aspects, right? Sodomites, profane, impious, ungodly, insubordinate, and so forth. It's listing off all these sinful natures, right? One of the things that it lists off is men stealers, but that's an English rendering. But the actual Greek word is, in that place, because I have the Greek text right here, the word is andropodistes, or something like that. And the word means a slave dealer. Okay, so, and it comes from the Greek word andropodon, which is a slave. Okay, so 1 Timothy 1:10 right there lists off slavery as one of the damnable, terrible sins. So that's Christian theology. Okay, it doesn't um, put slavery on a pedestal or excuse it. It demonized it. It ranks it as one of the terrible sins. Okay, that go against the sound doctrine and the law of God and goodness. Okay, quite simply. Okay, so just a quick recap. We have do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. On that premise, there's no grounds for slavery. Then we have the theological precedent where slavery, slave owning, slave dealing is ranked as a terrible sin, okay, and against the law. Next, what I want to read is Paul writing in 1 Corinthians 12. And again, I'm not denying Paul did write in those three instances that servants should obey their masters, but I think there's a double side to that, and I'll say that for the end here. But here we have Paul in 1 Corinthians 12 saying, verse 13, "For also in one spirit we all to one body were baptized, whether Jews or Greeks, whether servants or free men," which means slaves or not slaves, "and all into one spirit were made to drink. For also the body is not one member, but many." So that verse right there theologically decrees that there is no distinguishing between slave and free man, because why, we're all free under God, okay, and together in Christ, whatever else you want to throw in there, okay, but that's setting the precedent there. We're all one together, okay. Next verse, Paul writes again in Galatians 3, in verse 28, he says, "There is not here Jew or Greek, there is not here servant or free man, there is not here male and female, for all ye are one in Christ Jesus. And if ye are of Christ and of Abraham, ye are a seed, and according to promise, heirs." So again, Paul affirms that if you're following God and all that blah blah blah, there's no distinguishing between slave and servant, right? We're also commanded as Christians to act like, not to literally be, but to act like, to be a servant unto others. So if you always serve people and help people and serve them like you were their servant, you're doing the noble, honorable thing, right? And if everybody was to treat each other like that, then the world would be a better place. Instead of people actually enslaving people or oppressing people or using or taking advantage of people, if everybody helped each other like servants, then it would be cooperative and constructive. So anyways, the next verse, which again Paul has written, is from Colossians 3, verse 10. It says, "And having put on the new, which is renewed in regard to knowledge, after the image of him who did create him, where there is not Greek and Jew, circumcision and uncircumcision, foreigner, Scythian, servant, freeman, but the all and in all, Christ." So again, the same precedent. So Paul, even though Paul elsewhere said, "Servants, obey your masters," right? Paul himself has already, right now, 3 or 4 times affirmed that there's no such thing as slaves. We're all together as one, right? So again, Paul in Colossians 4 says, "The masters, that which is righteous and equal to the servants give ye, having known that ye also have a master in the heavens." So that right there is for anybody who, for whatever reason, still has a slave, or at whatever point in their life they have a slave, and then they come across this Christian concept, oh, you should all be equal and you shouldn't have slaves. Then that person who is a master, their instruction is, do what is righteous and equal to your servants. So that is a command to not have the distinction of them as being a slave. If you treat them as equals, then they're not slaves to you. You see my point? Then in Matthew 20, verse 26, I mean, there's many verses that touch on this, but this is just one example. But it says, "Not so shall it be among you, but whoever may will among you to become great, let him be your ministrant or servant." Okay, and verse 27, "Whoever may will among you to be first, let him be your servant." Okay, so that's the instruction for you to act like a servant to others. You see my point? There's no command or allowance anywhere to enslave others or to keep servants, nothing like that. Then we go over to 1 Corinthians 7, verse 23. It says, with a price you were bought, meaning symbolically. It says, become not servants of men. With a price you were bought, become not servants of men, each in that in which he was called, brethren, in this let him remain with God. So there's enough scriptural evidence here from the New Testament that there's no grounds or allowance for slavery. Not at all. In fact, there should have also been, yeah, there we go. Luke 4:18. I thought I had another one. It's quoting the Tanakh, the Old Testament. It says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he did anoint me to proclaim good news to the poor, sent me to heal the broken of heart, to proclaim to captives, meaning those who have been enslaved, to proclaim to captives deliverance, and to blind receiving of sight, to send away the bruised with deliverance. In fact, when you search the Bible for the word captives, it only occurs twice in the New Testament. That's one of them. And in Romans 16, verse 7, Paul, because this is used throughout the New Testament, comparing yourself to being a servant of God or a servant of Christ following the Messiah, right? The disciples and apostles frequently use that term to talk about themselves, right? In Romans 16:7, whoever is narrating, might be Paul here, it doesn't matter. Point being that he calls him and his fellows, he says, my fellow captives. Okay, that's the only second occurrence of captives in the New Testament. The only other one is Luke 4:18, where it's quoting the Tanakh, where the Messiah will proclaim deliverance to captives. And I know that's twofold. It's also on a deeper level, but it's also at the face value. You're proclaiming deliverance to captives. How would that come across? Well, you would be saying that there's no longer slavery. There's no longer slaves. You would be demonizing the position of slave master or slave trader, which is all the verses I just read from the New Testament. Okay? So right there. I mean, for anybody to come out and say, well, there should have been more explicit rules against slavery. I mean, how much more explicit rules do you want? When it outright says, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, where it says that there is no slave or free man, we're all one together, where it outright says, if you are a master, treat your slave with equalness and righteousness. When you have rules and theological premises and precedents, like all those things, there's no grounds to justify slavery. And if anybody, whether they called themselves a Christian or not, back throughout history, whether anybody did, enslave anybody or not, I mean, if anybody did enslave somebody, they had no Christian theological grounds to justify it. They just made up some stupid nonsense to justify it. That's absolutely it. Or they brought up some Old Testament verse to justify it. But you quite simply cannot find it in the New Testament. And anybody who called or considered themselves a Christian trying to justify slavery by bringing up Old Testament slavery verses, that just shows how unchristian they are. Because if they were Christian, they would know their own side of the Bible, so to speak, and they would know all the verses I just read, where you should treat each other as equals. If anything, you should be a servant unto others, not the other way around. You know what I mean? Jesus came to set the captives free, to proclaim liberty, and all this and that there. He didn't come to reinforce slavery. So, anyways, slavery is a shame, and if I had a time machine, I would go back in time, take all the slave masters, slave dealers, and all that, and, I don't advocate capital punishment, but, I don't want to come across like some terrible, evil, dark warlord, but I would deal with them severely, let's put it that way. Right? I would never stand for it. I don't know how people justified it back in the day. It's ridiculous. Especially just a couple hundred years ago. That recently, people doing it, it's just ridiculous. But slavery still happens today. And the only reason it happens in most places in the world, besides criminal, like gang slavery of girls and this and that, most of the slavery here is because of religion. One religion in particular, but I won't get into that, right? And it's because people have these dogmatic principles by which they justify things that are unjustifiable. That's the problem. But anyways, the New Testament, Jesus, Christianity does not condone slavery. I just wanted to read these verses to prove it. Anyways, take care, folks. God bless you all.